All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we do a 2023 SEC Championship game preview and prediction. Georgia and Alabama once again. Bulldogs 4-point favorites, 56 is the total. 4 p.m. Eastern time on CBS Live from Atlanta, Georgia. Looking at this Bulldog offense, Nick, it's led by Carson Beck, who's had a splendid season. He didn't have the greatest of effort with a lot of his top pass catchers not playing against Georgia Tech. But so far this year, he's been highly impressive, with timing routes, throwing down the field, with accuracy, touch, 72% completion rate, just shy of 3,500 yards, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I mean, this has just been a great effort this year from Carson Beck. I think this offense is in a much better position than it was with Stetson Bennett, who did very well in the system for Georgia. But this guy is legit arm talent, much better than I think Bennett had in his touch, accuracy. His confidence as well in the middle of the field is certainly showcasing that. What do you make of the Jacksonville native's first year? 12 games under his belt. Now he goes into the biggest one of his career.
Beck is certainly a superstar quarterback for Georgia. He's really developed into the star player. In the past, quarterbacks at Georgia had kind of been more of that game manager type thing. You look at the past with Jake Fromm, Stetson Bennett, Jacob Eason, those kind of players that were more, game managers. They got the job done. They were serviceable, but they never really jumped off the page at you as a superstar athlete. And Carson Beck is a superstar player at this point in time, and he's better than any of those quarterbacks in the Smart era so far. 72% completion percentage this season, nearly 3,500 yards passing, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 3 scores on the ground as well. A big physical quarterback that stands in the pocket and completes the passes. He's very solid downfield. He's got a plethora of weapons to throw to. This Georgia offense is pretty solid, 39.6 points per game, so nearly 40 points per game. Their passer rating is pretty solid, 167.62, 25 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. Good numbers all over the place for this passing attack. It's got a really deep wide receiver room and obviously the X factor in their tight end, Brock Bowers. A very solid room, some great weapons for Beck to throw to, and he's really blossomed in the system.
Yeah, Bowers is one of many that didn't play against Tech. 661 and 51 grabs, 6 touchdowns, even though he only played 9 games this year. Leads the team in all those categories is Bowers, who's certainly great down the seam, can make plays on the boundary. He's also good end-around situations. He's even a very reliable blocker as well. So Bowers, he's a do-it-all tight end for Georgia. Dominic Lovett certainly hasn't showcased his speed as much this year, but he's second on the team in all those categories. Instead of touchdowns, he has 49 recs and 552 yards, only about 11 yards per reception. This is still a guy that can win downfield and be a good weapon underneath. Marcus Rasmi, Jack Saint in the middle of the field. He's really showcased his strong hands. Ladd McCottney, he's a guy they love to get downfield on post routes, go routes. His questionability, though, is something to monitor. He has an ankle he's dealing with, did not play, and Kirby Smart doesn't sound that hopeful that he will. Before the Georgia Tech game, he says he hasn't been able to do a whole lot. Rava Thomas, he's also got a bit of a foot issue going on. So they're hoping to have both of these guys back. This is a pretty deep group of pass catchers when fully healthy. Arian Smith, Dylan Bell, I think they can certainly step up if they need him to. Arian Smith, another guy who's really battled injuries in his career, but he's still on the roster. He's made a couple of grabs this season, including 2 against Georgia Tech, so he has plenty of speed if they need to replace some of it. And then back to Bell, he's kind of a Swiss Army knife for them. So right now things are very hopeful, I think, for this receiving corps. But if the 4th and 5th leading pass catchers can't go, Nick, that might be a bit of a concern, especially in the gritty hours of this contest.
We had some question marks about how this offense would look when they replaced Todd Monken with Mike Bobo calling the plays, and it's been a pretty solid transition. This offense has been really good, a lot better than I thought it would be. Brock Bowers is still that ultimate weapon, the ultimate wild card player in college football, one of the best players I've ever seen in terms of tight ends and just pure raw talent that he has. 661 receiving yards, 13 yards per catch, 6 scores. Didn't play against Georgia Tech. Good decision in my opinion. No need to potentially damage him or get an injury like that against Tech. That was really not necessary. Nice move by Kirby Smart and Co. to sit him. I thought that was solid. Dominic Lovett, fantastic player as well, 552, and the 3 scores. Rosemary St. Jack Saint, 16.3 yards per catch, 4 scores, 4.72. Ladd McConkey, 418, 16.1, and 2 scores. His injuries certainly concerning. If you're a Georgia fan, you'd like to see him fully healthy. Rara Thomas as well. A nice ad they got out of the portal, 16.7 yards per catch, 1 score for him. He has not really been as exciting as we thought he would be, but maybe battling some injuries. Oscar DeLapp, another true tight end they have, another big physical blocking tight end, 249, 12.5, and 3 scores for him. It really is a deep wide receiving room. You can kind of pick your poison here if you're Carson Beck, who you want to throw to. Your first look may not be open, but you have second second or third look that can make space and create things happen. I think this is a very deep wide receiving room and fantastic for Beck.
Yeah, this run game certainly hasn't been as polished as we've seen in years past. We're still averaging 5.2 yards per attempt, 32 touchdowns on the year. They absolutely, murdered Ole Miss on the ground with 300 yards and 5 of those scores. 262. Beck in the passing attack didn't have the strongest day, but it's all right. Kendall Milton really bailed them out. This year, though, in SEC play, Nick, they've not been that great running the ball. Missouri really had their number against Florida. They were good, but they weren't elite. Kentucky certainly took them some hard efforts, but overall, that was a big day for Beck through the air. At Auburn, absolutely nothing. This season hasn't been the greatest. Only 3 games of 200-plus rushing yards. They're still averaging at a pretty high clip of 185 yards per contest. Dejon Edwards, 780 and 11 touchdowns. Bailden's now up to 10 scores and 644 yards. They haven't had the depth like we thought they would early on in the year due to some injuries and whatnot. The physicality, though, is still the name of the game, Nick, and it's led by this phenomenal offensive line. Xavier Truss was playing right guard this past game due to Tate Ratledge not playing. He's a phenomenal player for them when he's slotted in at right guard. Also want to monitor his availability. I know he's a little banged up as well with a knee, so certainly up in the air at this moment in time. Anticipation doesn't think he will play. This interior is still great, though. Cedric Van Pran, a leader at center, has been great. And then whoever they slot at left guard, Micah Morris or Dylan Fairchild, they've only allowed to combine 2 pressures this year on almost 700 combined snaps. That position's been rock solid for them. At left tackle, though, Ernest Green hasn't been as great. And then, Truss, whenever he's at right tackle, haven't been as great there on those sides. The offensive line, again, they're still the nation's best in terms of physicality. Them not having Amarius Mims, though, is certainly something that bothered them. Losing, Broderick Jones to the NFL, I think, was certainly a big notable loss. But Amarius Mims is back, had a great game against Georgia Tech, and I think they're pretty confident with this offensive line, even if they are banged up going into Atlanta.
A fantastic offensive line. It's a very physical unit. Kirby Smart has preached physicality in the trenches. They're battling a great defensive front seven from Alabama, so that is a tough matchup potentially for this unit, but overall a very strong physical unit. They haven't run the ball quite as well as we hoped they would, but still impressive numbers. Dejon Edwards, 780, 5.3 yards per carry, 11 scores. Kendall Milton, 644, 6.5 yards per carry, and 10 scores on about 100 attempts. Dylan Bell, Cash Jones are all involved as well. On the back end, this is a good unit on offense full together. Again, like I said, I was concerned with this offense replacing Todd Monken with Mike Bobo, but it has worked out fantastically for Georgia so far, 39.6 points per game. They really are scoring in bunches here. They've looked good the past couple of weeks as well. I know 31 points against Georgia Tech may not be as exciting as some fans would hope, but 30 against Tennessee, 52 against Ole Miss, 30 against Mizzou, and 43 against Florida are all pretty solid results for this offense.
Yeah, Georgia second nationally in third down conversion percentage. Their jailbreak screen, they like to break out in the red zone primarily. It's just unstoppable. That usually leads to a touchdown. I know Alabama's well aware of that. And then even if you have these guys on third and long, they seem to always have guys open across the middle of the field. Getting this offense off the field's hard. The defense gets a lot of the talk. This offense is ridiculously good over the past 3 years. Moving to the Alabama offense, it's going to look to match, Jalen Milroe. And this is a guy that's really taken shape over the last month. Early on in the season, I felt that, some of the mistakes he made against Texas were not good. They were very bad in that loss. I didn't feel like he was as decisive as a runner as he possibly could be. Last year, of course, when he got a couple of starts, he made waves as a runner. But he still made a lot of errors, especially throwing the football. His development has been ridiculously impressive, Nick, especially over the last month. He looks very poised, very confident in the pocket. He is now a decisive runner. Something just clicked at the start of November, 155 and 4 scores against LSU after, a couple of games where he had negative rushing yards. He's clearly been watching tape or something, Nick, because he's finally showcasing his running abilities. He's always had that good explosiveness. Again, though, the decisiveness was not very good one bit. And he's flipped the script on that. You've seen that against Auburn. I think through the air as well, he's showcasing some nice confidence. He's always had a nice, beautiful deep ball ride, but he's really showcasing improvements when it comes to the intermediate range and short throwing. I think that's one thing that's really, been awesome to see with him is what he's been able to do on the run as well, throwing the football. Certainly not a perfect quarterback by any means. And of course, the whole talk is going to be that big 4th and 31 ball that he had to Isaiah Bond against Auburn to survive Jordan Hare. But even if he didn't have that, Nick, I thought he had a phenomenal game. He looked really good. And I feel confident of him I feel, fine with him as my quarterback going into this game after a phenomenal month in November.
I certainly feel fine with him as my quarterback. He has really turned around in the preseason. There were some people that love Milroe, some people that were on the fence. You and I were both on the fence about Milroe being the starter. The Texas game was a disaster, right? That's simply a way to put it. Got benched for USF, and that completely changed the trajectory of this season. He got benched for USF, and came back in, has been lights out in November, especially looked fantastic against LSU, fantastic against Kentucky on the road in a tough environment, and looked great in the tough and even tougher environment on the road at Auburn just this past weekend. The Hail Mary aside, in the 4th and 31 aside, he still had a great game. I do totally agree with you. No mistakes other than the 2 times where he stepped over the line of scrimmage and threw the ball, but both of those really ended up being moot points in the whole grand scheme of things due to the touchdown at the end of the game, and really that first drive, they were able to get points at the end of that as well. So overall, Milroe has been fantastic, 66.4% completion percentage now, really improving to 2,500 yards, 21 passing touchdowns, 6 interceptions, cutting down on the turnovers as of late, looked better against LSU, looked better against Kentucky and Auburn, no turnovers in those games, I believe, solid numbers, and obviously he is a dual threat on the ground. He's gotten more confident. He had a huge run against Auburn. It was 3rd and 20. He ran all the way down the field, barely missed the line to gain, took a huge hit, took the defender out with him, set up a 4th and inches where Alabama was able to use a toss play to Roydell Williams to get the first down and keep the game alive on 4th and inches. He's been fantastic on the ground as well, 439, 3.5 yards per carry, and 12 scores. I don't think he should be in the Heisman consideration at this point. I don't think he is a top 5 Heisman contender, but he's having a fantastic season outside of that and something to be very proud of. He has really developed as a young man and as a player for Alabama, and it's fantastic.
Up to 439 rushing and 12 touchdowns. His legs are obviously going to be a big part of this game. I think Georgia's certainly going to look to have a lot of spies on him. So he's just going to have to make plays, exiting the pocket, make the right decisions, and then continue to keep his eyes downfield. This running game's certainly going to be a big topic. Jason McClellan's up to 803 and 6 scores. Roydell Williams knocking on the door 500 yards. This run game's really just not that great. They ended up having 192 against Auburn. Against Kentucky, they were able to get things going. Against LSU, it was obviously great, more than just Miller's legs. And they've been better over the second half of this season. They got completely stonewalled against Texas A&M for only 23 yards. This running game, though, Nick, that's certainly going to continue to be strong of physicality. That's no doubt one bit, especially Roydell Williams. Jason McClellan, he's got the better speed. He's certainly got nice abilities to get skinny and get through some of these lanes. That's going to lead to this offensive line, though. These guys have to be sound. Obviously, at left tackle, Caden Proctor, he's been a liability, much better as of late, but early on in the season, he was just awful at the left tackle spot. Obviously, it's been a big problem in college football this year. Some of these younger guys getting the nod, and they're certainly learning as the year goes on. Tyler Booker, his left guard spot is great. At center, Seth McLaughlin, I think, has had a pretty disappointing year. Hasn't allowed a sack, a lot of bad snaps. Certainly hasn't been the most polished run blocker either. Jaden Roberts, I think he's been a pleasant surprise for them at right guard. And then at right tackle, of course, you have a first-round prospect in J.C. Latham. Certainly going to be a bookend in this game. Him and Tyler Booker are the guys I'm keen on, Nick. These guys have to be great, and not just pass protection, but powering through the run as well. That certainly seems like it's going to disappoint here. And I think like Texas game all the way back in week 2, probably going to see something similar to that.
The offensive line has gotten a whole lot better. The bad snaps are concerning, but this offensive line has been fantastic. Proctor's been leaps and bounds better. The freshman really learned from his mistakes against Texas, has been physical. Jason McClellan was reportedly seen in a boot at the end of the game against Auburn this past weekend. That is something to keep an eye on. He may not be a go. Haven't seen anything concrete about that, just something to keep an eye on. He could be out. And if he is missing, that is a big loss. 803 yards in the season, 4.8 yards per carry, and 6 scores. Roydell Williams, though, has been a good number 2 back. I think he could step up and be that 1 back if they need to. Against Georgia, he's having a great season, in my opinion. 500 yards, nearly 500 yards on the ground, 5.3 yards per carry, and 4 scores. Jam Miller, he got a nice amount of touches against Auburn, 167, 5.4, and 1 score for him. Plus, you have Justice Haynes as well that can be involved on the ground. He has 2 scores, 6.5 yards per carry, and 137. This rushing attack is not exactly how I'd hoped it would be. It's really not living up to the expectations that I had in the preseason. 4.47 yards per attempt on the ground. The offense as a whole, 35.8 points per game, I think is a fantastic number still. I think this is an offense that is producing when they need to with a great wide receiving core.
Yeah, I think Milroe designed QB runs, saw a lot more of them against LSU, and they had massive success. I've been calling for it all year, and they finally unveiled it. Milroe's success this year as a passer, his growth really kind of coincides with Jermaine Burton getting back to full health. He essentially has 8 games of 60-plus yards this year, only averaging 3 receptions per game this season. Certainly isn't a possession guy by any means, but he's been a big playmaker for them down the field. 197 and 2 scores against A&M. It only got better the more times they went to him. 105 against Chad, where he was left wide open. This has certainly been a big playmaker for them, the former Bulldog. Isaiah Bond, of course, he's getting a free dinner in Tuscaloosa the rest of his life. 75 yards in that game-winning touchdown against Auburn. He's now the second leading pass catcher with 542 yards, a team-high 39 receptions. Mari Niblack, he's been a nice pass catcher for them at tight end. Certainly kind of took over that role we thought C.J. Dupree would have. Malik Benson, Kobe Pratis. These guys have certainly made some good plays this year. Kendrick Law only have 13 receptions. Certainly the production from this receiving corps I thought would be better because they have a lot of former five-star guys here. Jalen Hale had a big receiving touchdown early on in the season. Haven't really seen him since. They like to unveil him from time to time. It's kind of an interesting rotational unit they have here where the numbers aren't going to wow you. But if you're not, if you're a defensive coordinator for Georgia, you have to have your eyes on these guys because they'll put certain players in that can certainly just burn you out of nowhere that have gotten limited touches all season long.
I think this is a very deep wide receiving room that, like you said, has interesting balance. Burton has stepped up to be that number one guy when Burton is playing at full potential. He is an absolute star, 749, 22.7 yards per grab, 7 touchdowns. Fantastic numbers on him. Bond had that incredible catch against Auburn. Obviously, that's going to be talked about forever at this point, but he's still having a great season outside of that. 542, 13.9. and 4 scores. Nyblack, kind of a hybrid wide receiver, tight end sort of position there. They move him around a little bit. He's been good in the intermediate game. 16.9 yards per grab, 4 scores, 304 for him. Kobe Prentice, 282, 17.6, and 2 scores. Malik Benson as well has been solid. CJ Dupree, I've been happy with him. People have not been as pleased with him, but I still think the numbers are good. 160 on 8 grabs, 20 yards per catch. He was good in blocking, as has Robbie Oots, the other tight end, who had a really physical block on that clutch 4th and inches toss play to Roydell Williams. Jalen Hale, Kendrick Law, they can be used as sort of trick play, sort of set up Law. It's kind of been used as a gadget guy at points. He's been pretty solid for that. Hale has that 1 touchdown, 30 yards per catch so far this season on his 5 limited grabs. This is a deep room. Ja'Cory Brooks really hasn't even been used at all this year, and he had a great season 2 years ago and had a good season last year. So Brooks could potentially be involved as well. This is a deep unit, in my opinion, that's got some nice depth that could be really helpful against a very solid secondary that Georgia has.
Looking at the Georgia defense, this is a really good unit. Obviously, they're still very good against the run, 3.9 yards per carry. They aren't as polished, though. They seem quite vulnerable at times. Auburn had a nice day with them. Alabama, they're not off the hook either, so we'll get to that, though. Florida ripped off a few nice runs. That stretch play for Missouri did very well. Georgia Tech, there's only 2 games they've allowed 200-plus yards since playing that Joe Burrow LSU team on the ground. Auburn and Tech this year were able to do that. They're having some good success to the boundary. Georgia Tech with some speed as well. So they're certainly able to expose them a little bit. Tennessee, first play of the game, they go 75 yards. Only ended the day with 130. So the rest of the afternoon, they really tightened down. In that first quarter, really, against Ole Miss, they didn't look that great either. But overall, this is still a run defense, Nick, but they're not getting gashed by any means. I think the Auburn game was a little concerning. But the threat they have of running the football is pretty interesting. Their speed, their quarterback run ability to get vertical or uphill. Alabama, they kind of have that same threat, though, with Jalen Milroe, so it might be something to monitor. But it's really hard just to criticize this defense. No, they don't have any first-round talent up front. Warren Brinson, though, looks like he should be fully healthy for this one. Chaz Chambliss has done a lot better this year than I thought he would, at least as a run stopper. Zaire Stackhouse has been phenomenal. Zion Logue as well. So, they still got guys who can slant downhill and get in there with some help. Jordan Hall, I think he's a little banged up as well. So that's something that you want to monitor. Run defense is still polished, though, Nick, but I think, Alabama, they're going to look to take something out of Auburn's playbook after getting absolutely trounced themselves this past Saturday. What's your expectation for this run D going against Alabama and a speedy, accelerating quarterback?
This run D has shown to be a bit shaky at times, which is something that you don't really expect for a Georgia defense. 3.98 yards per attempt given up, 12 rushing touchdowns allowed as well. We saw Auburn have a lot of success earlier in the season being able to run the ball on this front 7. That's certainly something that would be concerning if you're a Georgia fan. The run defense is vulnerable. I think this is a solid group. They're going to have to spy Milroe throughout the game. If they struggle to do so, or if they don't have spy on Milroe, he can certainly dash you on the ground. I like to see a linebacker spy Milroe at some point. I don't know who that's going to be, but someone's going to have to be able to get that job done. This is a very physical unit. It doesn't really have the names or highlights, the guys that you think you expect. Stackhouse is probably your biggest name you highlight on this front 7. 17 total tackles for him, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a pick. But it's missing that sort of big highlighting player that's draft caliber guy on this front 7, which is a bit disappointing. But overall, they're still a solid unit that gets the job done. They put pressure on the quarterback. They're going to have to get pressure on Milroe and force him to make mistakes.
Yeah, if you want to speak about superstar players, that's Jamon Dumas Johnson with that forearm. He seems to be week to week. That's what Kirby Smart called it before the GT game. I know he said they're certainly want him for a game like this. It just appears he won't be playing. And if he does, he'll probably be at 50% at least. A forearm injury, that's got to be very painful. Maybe a Thomas Davis type Super Bowl performance, though, if it does give the go. Regardless of these other linebackers, I think they've really stepped up. Smell Munden's had to be the leader here, second leading tackler for them. CJ Allen, he's played pretty solid, hasn't been perfect. by any means. He's been a below average player, I think, so far to this point, but he did look good against Ole Miss. This is certainly a unit you have to continue to look at, Nick, in the middle. I think they're looking to try to confuse. And I think, again, that QB run game, just trying to beat them to the edge and out of position. And it doesn't happen very often with Georgia, but not having their leader there, freshman C.J. Allen, very talented player. And then, look at their pass rush as well. Has certainly been under fire as of late. Juwan Dumas-Johnson hasn't played in a while. He's still the team leader in sacks with 3.5. Jalen Walker, another one of those inside linebackers that they're going to lean on. I've seen him used quite a bit this year as an outside pass rusher, though. Michael Williams didn't, he's not having the season at all I thought he would. Only 14 tackles, 3.5 sacks in 11 games. I really thought he'd be a contender for Defensive Player of the Year. And this is something we talk about every time we mention Georgia, is the edge rushing presence is just not all that good, which is crazy for having top ranked recruiting classes year in, year out. But it's certainly the truth, Nick, and I don't harp on them too much because they find a way to get their sacks, especially in key moments, either corner blitzes or effective stunts and twists. But this pressure package for the Bulldogs isn't the greatest, I don't think. What are your thoughts on that coming into this game?
Certainly is interesting. They're going to have to find a way to get better ability to pressure off the edge. Juwan Dumas-Johnson, if he plays, that's a huge add for this Georgia defense. He doesn't play, that's a big loss at linebacker. He would be a great player to have to monitor Milroe. 34 total tackles for him, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks in his 9 games. And Michael Williams has not played really anywhere near what we'd hope. 14 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Jalen Walker, wanted to see more out of him. 14 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. Smell Mundon, the second leading tackler, 60 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. He's your leader there in the linebacking core. Of course, Georgia is going to spread the love with their tackles. No one's going to completely dominate the tackle sheet because they do have so many different guys that are very talented in that regard. But you just want to see some more production, I think. I know you expect it to be spread out, but you're just kind of disappointed with some of this production so far this team. They haven't been able to really get in the backfield at times. They've struggled against the run against Auburn and some other teams. And it could certainly be a vulnerability and weakness for this Georgia defense.
Looking at the Bulldogs secondary, the times I've picked Georgia to lose games is because I didn't really like what they had in the secondary. The talent's great, but their ability to cover sometimes certainly wavers. And that was showcased early in games this year. Their 5-game stretch just ended about 2 weeks ago against Tennessee, where they had given up first drive touchdowns on 5 straight games, most of them through the air. And then Tennessee, of course, had a 75-yarder. And they certainly calmed down after that. They don't really get beat a whole lot. I think Missouri probably had the best at being able to sustain success. Julian Humphrey, a player who has earned a larger role, suffered an injury a couple weeks ago. Looks like he's not going to be getting the go. Other than that, they're pretty healthy. Tyke Smith finally on the right side of that this year. He's been great for them. He's also been an effective pass rusher as well. That's allowed Javon Bullard to kind of be not just a strictly slot corner, but he's played a lot of safety as well. Malachi Starks having an All-American-like campaign. So they have phenomenal ball players back here. Kamari Lassiter's had a great season as well. And then, the other side as well certainly might be, an issue for Georgia. The secondary, again, they've gotten burned at times, and that's why I picked Bama to beat them a couple years ago. I thought that would get absolutely torched, and they certainly did. And I think Dalen Everett, certainly a guy they're going to look to target. He's probably been the biggest liability this year at corner. But they aren't the most polished in zone, Nick. They seem to get absolutely torched when their defensive line's not doing that heavy lifting. It'll certainly be a problem. No, they're not facing Bryce Young, but this guy in Milroe has a nice, beautiful, deep ball he can uncork, and he's got guys that can come down with it as well. And again, Milroe's really progressed in terms of making plays from the pocket and outside of it with keeping his eyes up against zone coverage. If I'm the Georgia secondary, I'm happy with what I have here, but I got to know that what's happened in the past is certainly fresh in everyone's minds.
What's happened in the past is certainly fresh. Milroe can really uncork that deep ball and absolutely torch you. We saw that in that one touchdown against Auburn where he just absolutely launched a beautiful ball. A bad coverage bust for Auburn. You could see a coverage bust or two for Georgia. I think it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility they have a mistake like that and allow a guy like Burton or Bond to be totally wide open down the field and get the job done. The secondary has 12 interceptions and 11 touchdowns given up passing. Not really the ratio you would hope to see if you're a Georgia fan. The secondary gets beat from time to time and has some issues. Tyke Smith is the leading tackler for this team, and in the secondary, 6'3" total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 4 picks, 2 pass breakups. Javon Bullard, Malachi Starks, 50 tackles for Bullard, 43 for Starks, 2 interceptions each for them. Starks has 6 pass breakups, 4 for Javon Bullard. Those are your guys getting your interceptions there. That's where the bulk of that production comes from. Dylan Everett as well has 5 pass breakups, 25 total tackles. The production is good enough at times, but you would want to see more picks for this unit. I think Milroe could certainly have the opportunity to pick this team apart deep downfield if he gets the chance to do so in the backfield. If the pass rush is not on their edge game and getting him and making him uncomfortable, he could really uncork a deep ball or two and put this team in a great position to score points against the secondary.
No, looking at the Crimson Tide defense, Georgia didn't look great defending the run, and neither did Alabama against Auburn. They were just not good. 244 allowed. That threat that they have just seems to work against them. They did nothing against New Mexico State, though, so very odd. They turn into the 90s Bulls whenever they play these high-end SEC teams, Nick. That's just been the history of college football, though. And this year, though, Alabama's been characteristically great against the run. Daniels obviously was able to tear them apart when they played LSU. They had clean pockets for days, and he just took off and scampered for a lot of yards. Other than that, though, they've been really impressive. They shut down Texas completely. Tennessee, nothing available there. Held Kentucky to under 100 yards. I mean, this is a really good run defense. The defensive line, I've been critical of them in the past of not having great production. They still don't. They're certainly doing much better this year of getting penetration. Guys like Justin Igbenai, he's up there. You look at some Tim Smith as well. Jamon Leavum as well, Tim Keenan and other players. So they got some bigger guys who've been stepping up this year. I think more importantly, the play from the linebacking position. I felt Deontay Lawson would really have to step up this season for Alabama because he did not look great a year ago. And even though he missed a couple of games this month, he's been a good player trying to get back into rotation. Been very sound for them. Tresman Marshall's been solid. Jihad Campbell, an absolute athletic specimen who's really stepped up the past couple of weeks. He's up to now second on the team in tackles. Glad that he's able to get on the field now, having a strong second half of this season. But more importantly, these edge rushers and Chris Braswell, Dallas Turner, these guys have been absolutely elite, Nick. They've both got double-figure tackles for loss, phenomenal amount of sacks as well. These guys certainly, with 8 each, they can certainly make their presence felt as those pass rushers. But against the run, these guys are strong and sturdy as well. And I think it's going to be a good matchup between these guys and the Bulldogs in the trenches.
The number of yards given up on the ground, 244 yesterday against Auburn, was disappointing. If you're an Alabama fan, that's certainly not what you wanted to see. But I think it's a bit of an outlier. Like you said, they play like the 2019 LSU plus the early 2000s Pete Carroll USC teams. Basically every great team, the Nebraska teams in the early 2000s, all in one when Auburn hosts teams at Jordan Hare and the big SEC matchups. It's just a weird thing you got to study. 17.9 points per game given up. I think that's a number that's a little high, but not too bad for Alabama. 3.79 yards per attempt on the ground. Pretty solid number, if you ask me. This defense has been solid throughout the season. They have some really big physical guys. It starts with the edge rushers, like you said, Dallas Turner. He's your next star. People wondered how he would do replacing Will Anderson. I think he's lived up to the billing and some. 12.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 46 total tackles. Braswell, 40 total tackles, 10.5 and 8 sacks for him. Very good numbers. Jihad Campbell had a big muff punt recovery against Auburn, a big player in that regard. 61 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss for him, plus a pick, 3 pass breakups, 2 fumble recoveries. Solid numbers. Justin Igbo, 57 total tackles. Deontay Lawson, 57 total tackles. Igbo, 10.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. Lawson, 4.5 and 3 sacks for them. Tresman Marshall, the former Georgia player, has been solid at times. I've been happy with him. 50 total tackles, 3.5 and 2.5 sacks for him. Beg your pardon. This is a solid Tim Keenan, Tim Smith. These guys are all good. Jaheim Otis as well has been involved. A nice list of who's who of very talented players on this front part of this defense. This is a very physical unit that could have success against a Georgia rushing attack that's not been fantastic this year.
Yeah, Jaheim Otis, 6'5", 320. Certainly has been a really good front seven for Alabama. You look at their secondary. This is certainly a unit that has had some issues. Arkansas in that second half was able to attack the middle of the field. You look at Tennessee, who had a lot of success downfield early on in that first half, ended up getting shut out in the second. Jane Daniels was having a great game until he got knocked out, even though they're starting to play with some better momentum. The secondary is certainly still very polished, though. You got to be able to defend the middle of the field. And again, at the Texas game, I figured the safeties, Caleb Downs in his second career start, figured they would struggle, and they got absolutely torched. I think they're much better than they were all the way back in September. Downs having a great year, certainly a lock for a freshman All-American campaign. Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry on the outside. These guys have been phenomenal this year. You look at Malachi Moore, though, a guy that certainly is having more of the season he had a couple seasons ago. Jalen Key at safety, maybe more of a liability there. I think as slot, though, Moore's playing some great football. Good opportunity for people to continue to remember who he is. And then out wide at corner, I think they've been very sound. And then Downs, his versatility's really been on display this year against the run and his ability to, play in that slot role. Also in the safety spot, I think Downs, his usage has been very good this year. He's played the most snaps on this defense. What do you think about the secondary, Nick? Because, again, they have certainly had some struggles. Hasn't been perfect. Georgia, they're just incredibly tough to defend across the middle of the field. I don't think they're going to have any issues on the boundary. But, if Vlad McConaughey can play, that's certainly some speed you got to be aware of. If they roll Arian Smith out there, got to be wary of that also. I don't expect them to be vulnerable on the outside, though, but across the middle of the field, Georgia, with Bowers and Rousey Jack saying his strong hands, they can certainly expose you there. And that's all that Georgia really needs to, march right down the field.
This is certainly a secondary that had some issues, but they didn't get really tested at all against Auburn in general. They're a very solid unit with two incredible players, Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold are two of the best corners in the country. Fantastic players. Kool-Aid hasn't really tested as of late, but still a fantastic player. Maybe he's not being tested because people know you don't want to test him. 25 total tackles, 6 pass breakups for him. Terrion Arnold, 55 total tackles, 5 picks, 10 pass breakups. He's been fantastic. Had the game-sealing interception against Auburn. Great player. Caleb Downs, the true freshman, incredible season. 95 total tackles, 2 interceptions, 3 pass breakups. This dude's a true freshman in the SEC. Nearly 100 total tackles at this point. Just an incredible number if you're looking at him from afar. Malachi Moore, he's come back from his previous disappointing seasons to having a pretty solid season. 44 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, of pass breakup. He's shaken off some injuries. One guy I have been a little disappointed is Jalen Key. Had 2 bad missed tackles against Auburn, 53 total tackles, 1 pick, and 1 pass breakup for him. If Key is locked in, that's a solid player to have. Trey Amos, a rotational piece, 12 total tackles for him, 2 pass breakups. The bottom part of the secondary concerns me with guys like Key and Amos, who have not really been exciting as I thought they would be when they came from their group of 5 transfers. But overall, Downs has been as advertised as the 5-star true freshman. Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry are the 2 best corner duo in the country. This is a very good secondary that is very solid against the pass. They have 12 interceptions to 14 touchdowns given up. A pretty good ratio here, and they get a great test against this Georgia offense.
Look at the tail of the tape. Team comparisons, that quarterback, I think it's pretty even with Milroe's progression and Beck's steadied consistency through the air with his great arm talent. Running back, will give Edwards and Milton the nod there. Certainly, I think they've been better all around. Wide receiver, I'm going to call it even. Brock Bowers isn't on the side of the Crimson Tide, but they certainly have got some weapons of their own that are, fast and speedy and can certainly make you hurt in open field. Offensive line, I'm going to give Georgia the nod there. Even if they're not fully healthy, I think they're still going to get the physicality edge. Defensive front, Georgia, I'll give it to them, even though Alabama's not too far behind. I think they have a nice edge at linebacker and in the secondary. I think Georgia, they certainly have some good players as well, but I don't seem to have the difference makers that Bama does. Kool-Aid McKinstry, a lot of people think he's going to be a first-round pick. Caleb Downs, people are already saying he's going to be a golden jacket type of player. So I think you certainly have the difference makers there, even though both of these units are really good. Bama has a clear edge at linebacker, though, if Jamon Dumas Johnson doesn't play. Nick, how do you feel about these edges here?
I think this is a fair tail of tape. I would give the quarterback right now to Carson Beck in Georgia. I think it's just a little bit better than Milroe. It is splitting hairs, though, 1A, 1B type of thing. I would like to give that to them. And I'm going to give the wide receiver to Alabama. I think as a collective unit, they're just slightly better than Georgia. Obviously, having a guy like Bowers is that ultimate wild card, but I think you give the nod slightly to Alabama just based off the pure depth of that wide receiving room and how you have so many different guys you can throw to. You have multiple different tight ends involved in the offense as well as some great wide receivers. The rest of it, I think, is very fair. Offensive line, defensive line do go to Georgia slightly, but that is a very fair. And I think the linebacker, defensive back goes to Alabama, and it's a pretty fair comparison for both of those teams.
Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction. Back in 2021, after they played Auburn, the offensive line looked awful. They only had 3 points before that final drive, before Bryce Young had some heroics. They were not good at all. And going into that game week, I said that Bama's going to neutralize this Georgia D-line and they're going to pick them apart in the secondary. That was exactly what happened, Nick. I was the only one in the world that picked Alabama. And, I must have been a wizard that day because they absolutely demolished Georgia unexpectedly. People thought Bama was going to get clobbered in that game. Fast forward to 2023, what just happened? They looked awful against Auburn going to Jordan Hare. Same talk's going to happen all week. This run defense got exposed. Nick Saban's team's not all that great. That's going to be the chatter all week long, right? They're going to hear that in the building. A lot of people are going to think it's a no contest, even though Georgia struggled against Auburn themselves, only won by, a couple of points against Georgia Tech in their own right. And again, they were fully in control of, while Bama had to really come up with some heroics. A lot of luck there was certainly probably involved. For Georgia, you got to put pressure on Milroe. Dynamic balance on that offense is daunting for them. For Bama, you want to slow down that run game. Pass protection needs to be stellar. You want to find the deep ball. I think Bama's going to check more boxes than Georgia will. I think they're going to slow down that run game. I think Milroe's going to continue to make plays. And I think Alabama's going to win this one, Nick. Maybe the bold prediction here, not as bold as it was a couple years ago. And Alabama certainly hasn't looked like they were in the early 2010s by any means. This is still a very tough football program. They stayed with the correct quarterback who looks really tough to defend at this moment in time. Very impressive what he's been able to do. And I think they will find that deep ball. I think pass protection will be good. Milroe, though, has got to avoid the mistakes, and I think he's matured enough here over the last month and a half that he's certainly going to limit those. He's got to be big, though. Can't let that QB spy get to him. He's got to throw accurate balls across the middle. I think Georgia's going to hang in there on offense. I just don't think the balance will quite be there against a really good Alabama defense. I'm taking the Tide to pull the upset and potentially punch their way into the playoffs.
No pick for me as an Alabama fan, but the script is certainly aligning to a way that you would like if you are an Alabama fan like I am. We saw this, like I said, 2 years ago. Alabama struggled, got bailed out late at Jordan-Hare. Then they came out and absolutely blitzed Georgia and Atlanta. I think some interesting stats you want to know. Alabama is 7-0 at the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium where this game is being played, an impressive stat. In the Saban era, Alabama is 7-2 against Georgia as well. As since Kirby Smart has taken over, Alabama has only one loss against Kirby since he has taken over, and they are 4-1 total against Georgia and Kirby Smart. So impressive numbers in general. If you look at that, the one loss obviously was a pretty devastating loss in the national championship game. Overall, this is a very exciting matchup. Obviously, this is the game of the week for a lot of people. Alabama should be in the playoff if they do win this game, in my opinion. I don't think you can keep Alabama out considering what they've been able to do in the second half of the season. I know they have that head-to-head loss at home to Texas, but I think when it comes down to it, they will find a way to get in if they do win this game. This is a very exciting matchup, another exciting chapter in this great rivalry that has been brewing between Alabama and Georgia. You know, cross-division rivals, you don't really see these teams two playing a whole lot, you would think, but these teams have found a way to play each other often in the Smart Saban era since, despite being in different divisions. This is exciting. You know, last SEC title game with the true traditional divisional format here in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. Exciting game, fantastic matchup between two very deserving teams. Can Alabama put a stop to Georgia's incredible winning streak in their two back-to-back national championships, or will Georgia keep going and continue to make history as they chase that vaunted three-peat that is really tough to come by in college football?
Yeah, as an Alabama fan, I'll ask you, where's your confidence level in Jalen Milroe ahead of this game compared to about a month ago? And do you think he's going to be able to, you think he's at a level now where he can get the job done, I should say?
I think he can get the job done. I am confident in Milroe. Maybe those are the famous last words. I think a mistake may happen at some point, but overall he's looked really good. Played against some bad defenses over the past couple of weeks, but he looked good against that Auburn defense that is no slouch. They're a decent unit. They held Georgia in check on offense, so that is the best comparison when you look at the two teams. That's a common opponent, right? Auburn on the road. The scores were similar for both teams. The defense for Auburn kept both offenses in check. I think he looked a little bit better than Beck did against Auburn, so that's why I feel okay coming to this one. But this is an incredible matchup. It really is a coin flip when you look at it.
Yeah, both quarterbacks had to come up with some magic there at the end. Great work by both of them. Going to be a great game. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me. Be it for today's episode.
I didn't have anything to say. I had nothing to say.